Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today in War Thunder we are having a look at some changelogs, and also we're going to be discussing some changes when it comes to the path to developers stuff. Looks like there's been a few rule changes which could open up the door to some more interesting ideas, so yeah, we'll have a look at them in a little bit. The first changelog which is available is update 1.1.01.0. 0.65. It's becoming a bit of a mouthful right now. It would have been nice if they just did 2 to make it a little bit easier, but there were a few flight model changes. So the first one was the TAR 152H. The wing profile has been recalculated to a thinner value. This allows a delay in shock stalling at high altitudes and speeds, so the landing with flaps will become easier with minimum fuel, and a bug causing motor overspeed at high altitudes has been fixed. I wonder if this is actually a buff or a nerf to the machine, if I'm honest with you. The TAR 152 is one of those machines that seems like a lot of people are put off because of its repair costs, but it is a monster when it wants to be. It's an incredibly good high-altitude fighter, and there's a reason why its repair cost is so high, because it is such a good machine. The I-225, the shock stalling momentum has been delayed for thinner profiles, so the rudder is more effective at high altitudes and speeds. That is a big change for that aircraft. So one of the issues the I-225 has, it's the same issue stuff like the I-185 has, even stuff like the Hurricane and what feels like the P-51, you know, a lot of the P-51s. When you go to high speeds, your rudder just gets stuck. It doesn't feel like moving, so therefore you have to be able to navigate with your ailerons and your elevator, and to be honest, this is a lot harder to do, to actually have precision when it comes to shooting, and if you have a machine which is a high-altitude, high-speed fighter, like the I-225, that extra little bit of maneuverability to be able to get the guns on target is going to mean a hell of a lot. So this change, I think, is quite large for the I-225, and also, I'd say give it a go. It's had a bunch of BR reductions over the last, few years, I suppose, and I've enjoyed it even when it was up BR. You know, it gives something different to the game. It gives a slightly different playstyle compared to all the other Soviet vehicles, where you just go mid-altitude and then try and force people down. The I-225 is pretty much a strictly high-altitude fighter, and it is works like that very, very well. The F4E and the EJ, according to the operations manual, the speed has been specified. It's been increased at altitudes below 9,000 meters. So therefore, these machines just got a little bit faster when it comes to the deck, so they'll be much more like the British Phantom, the FGR, I believe, when it comes to their top speed. The F4U1C and D, an engine bug causing insufficient thrust, has been fixed. I tell you what, the Corsairs are another very underrated machine, but generally they're underrated for pretty simple reasons. Their setup time to be able to get to altitude, to be able to get ready to go against a bunch of other aircraft, is around about 2 to 3 to 5 minutes longer than everything else. So you could get up to altitude with an F4U, and what happens is the battle's already taken place. So you kind of sat there on mop-up crew, and if you're a good mop-up, like you're able to get like 3, 4, or 5 kills by diving on people, you know, that's awesome. But at the same time, your whole team could be dead, and you just kind of sat there like, well, I wasn't really prepared. And this is the problem with like the meta of aerialistic, you know, the whole idea of climbing into each other and then just battering each other. But yeah, it's hopefully with this change, this will mean that these Corsairs will be a little bit better when it comes to trying to set themselves up for the fight. The Focke-Wulf 190, all of them, so this is from the A to the Ds, I suppose, or even the Fs as well. A bug has been fixed where the aircraft is unable to achieve overload over 6G at high speeds with minimum fuel load. Oh, okay, well that's not too much of a change, but I suppose it is nice that this has been fixed. The 190s have been changed a lot over the last few weeks, and they've been given some really good authority, especially at lower speeds. It's definitely a plane I'd say go check out again if you didn't like it before, because I, at least personally, fell out of love with the Focke-Wulfs a few years ago when their tails just started locking up completely at higher speeds. And it felt like the whole point of the Focke-Wulf, which was an energy fighter, was pretty much, impossible to do because of this fact. Sorry, it isn't an energy fighter, it's more of a boom and zoom fighter. But yeah, it is kind of how it is with that. Hopefully now it's a lot better. Now, I've been playing against them a lot in stuff like Hellcats, in stuff like Spitfires, and I've got to say they do seem to be handling better, even if, it isn't making much of a difference. The aircraft and helicopter model stuff has also been changed. The F4U6AU1 Corsair, the display of mounted armament menu items have been corrected. Nice. More information is good. So that's the first changelog, and then we have the second one. This is 1.101.0.71, and it came out today, and it does fix a bunch of protection parameters for US and Soviet MBTs. Hopefully this is the first change in a bunch of ones when it comes to the armor bug. If you don't know, we showed the armor bug the last changelog. Basically, if you have 2 layers of armor which touch at a specific point on a vehicle, then the damage calculation takes into account both parts of that armor. So instead of just taking into account the armor which is on that specific point, it takes both pieces of armor and puts them together. So let's say if you have a 100mm like shield next to a 200mm shield, it ends up with a 300mm shield, which obviously is not good. So, let's see what is going on. Sorry, it's a little bit early in the morning. So, let's see. Changes to protection parameters of the American and Soviet MBTs. Right. In the recently published changelog for the Raining Fire update, a few mistakes were made in the protection parameters of Soviet MBDs. While those parameters in the game were mostly set correctly, okay, we have corrected these issues and now present the latest protection values. In addition, the protection parameters on the M1 Abrams series of tanks has been adjusted. Interesting. So, for turrets of Soviet MBTs, the protection values of the sector of course angles plus or minus 30 from the vehicle axis are used. This means when a tank gets hit from those angles, protection is provided at a minimum as indicated. In the case of hitting from a course angle of 0, the protection might be noticeably higher than that's indicated and strongly depends on the point of impact on the turret. Oh, okay, so they're basically losing a bunch of armor on their turret, or at least that's the way I'm interpreting it. You don't shoot them in the turret anyway, though, so it isn't really much of an issue. The only place you really shoot Soviet MBTs in the turret is the gunner optic, because a few rounds of that tier can go through the gunner optic and kill the gunner, and also sometimes annihilate the breach as well. So I don't actually think that makes too much of a difference unless it really knackers their turrets, but I don't think it should. For tanks of the M1 series, the protection is indicated separately for the left and right sides of the turrets due to their different inclination angles. That's true. It is assumed that structurally the turret cheeks and lower frontal hull armor represent the same obstacle, installed at different angles. Because of this, the equivalent protection of the lower plates is set slightly higher than that indicated in the M1A2 publication, Struksforden Idakt och Imorgon, ett föredrag om svensk panzer med Ugdansen I historian. Let's go for that. These changes are not final and may be clarified and revised further in case of new documentary sources. So basically what they're doing is they're saying that the M1A2, or the M1s in general, the armor that is present in their turrets when it comes to cheeks is the same amount of armor which is on their lower plates, but they're all just angled slightly differently. So therefore, they will all have different overall protection because of the angle, but the actual armor itself is the same in all parts. And as you can see, they gave a bunch of wonderful sources, so you can have a look at these. This one is definitely interesting to me, and I'm going to have a look at this, because this relates to a report which wasn't actually done on an M1A2. So yeah, we'll see how it goes. God damn it. I love trying to make guesstimations on, classified vehicles. It really gets my jollies going. So the sound splash from torpedo launchers has been corrected. Well, that's nice, more information is power. The missing sound indicator of shot down enemy aircraft has been fixed. Is that like, I'm guessing, the command or whatever? Generally, I will say when I've been shooting down enemy aircraft, yes, there haven't been a ton of sounds coming out of them, but that's been fine. You get the visual indicator of aircraft destroyed or kill assist, so that's fine. The Ju-87B2 Stuka Siren has become audible in the cockpit view. Oh, that's a nice little touch. Piston and jet engine volume has been lowered where the spectator's view camera is close to the engine. Thank God, it was blowing my ears off. Ground vehicle engine volume has been slightly lowered in gunner view. That's also kind of interesting, because one of the things about the dev server is the inside the turret was very, very loud, and it seems like they're slightly toning it down over time, but I feel like these things could be fixed by people just moving their volume sliders. The volume of players' aircraft guns has increased slightly. That is fair. I think overall when it came to like the dogfight, the guns were very, very low. The sound effect of passing by missed shells has been reworked. Oh, not again. Not again, please. Last time they did this, it sounded like everything was all over the place. Mainly because they gave the sound to artillery. So whenever you got artillery called in on you, all you heard was zoom, 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 zoom. And it was not good for the brain. It actually kind of gave me a headache when playing. And I feel like that's probably not what you want to see. So obviously I haven't tested the passing by missed shells. Hopefully it's okay. A bug where music incorrectly overlaps in the hangar after a battle is over has been corrected. Well, that's good as well. So mostly quite positive changes. We'll have to see how these armor changes actually affect anything. I don't think on the Soviet MBTs it's really going to affect anything unless it makes certain rounds be able to go through the turrets when they couldn't before. But most of the time you don't shoot the things in the turrets. You shoot them the driver's ports, the road wheel, the lower glacis. If only you see the turrets, in my experience playing them and playing against them, what most people do is just shoot them in the breach and then run at them like a crazy pigeon. So yeah. The M1 series, we'll have to see if that changes anything. And if you want to see the protection parameters for them, they have made a handy-dandy chart here, which has all of the different stuff. So you can go and have a look at that. So, on to the pass to developers stuff. Now, when it comes to pass to developers, they actually do have some general rules on what you're allowed to post. So they have, positive rules, negative rules, and then, generally stuff you should look at before suggesting. And now we have a new part. So this is basically about the general idea of prototype vehicles which are unfinished. So before, what would happen is if you had a paper vehicle, it could not be passed, and it was obviously not needed, because paper or fictional vehicles, there's no point in passing to the devs because they're just not going to put them into the game unless they're Japanese. And when it comes to unfinished prototypes, there was kind of a rule which was, talking about how, there's no real need to pass them either because they probably fall in the same boats. Well, it seems like we've had that clarified by Coke Spray here, and it says sometimes it's easy to mistake a prototype vehicle for a paper one, while at other times making that distinction becomes difficult due to, for example, parts of the design existing while the full vehicle itself was never built. As these cases often result in a vehicle's classification being subject to individual interpretation, we've come up with a few simple guidelines to help users make this distinction easier and faster. Please refer to these guidelines when considering making a suggestion on a more obscure vehicle. And the reminder, of course, is paper fictional vehicles will not be accepted as valid suggestions, and such will not be approved for discussion. So, they talk about what constitutes a paper fictional vehicle. Obviously, if it's just one from a blueprint or a sketch, there's no major vehicle parts of it. Vehicle is completely made up. Simple stuff, right? And then the next one is what is an unfinished prototype. So the vehicle is partially constructed, vehicle-specific parts, so the guns, power plants, all that were built, but it was never put together. The additional notes is the main distinguishing feature between paper and non-paper vehicles is whether the vehicle in question itself or specific parts of it were already constructed at one point. For example, the hull of the E100 was partially constructed and would thus be a valid suggestion, whereas the TA-183 only existed as a wind tunnel scale model, thus not being a valid suggestion. Do note that these vehicles were often planned with purpose-built equipment such as power plants, but during their performance projections may have utilized existing equipment or were speculated to use commonly available equipment upon completion. This will not count as partially instructed unless historical sources state that these equipment pieces are in fact intended as standard for the vehicle. So they've opened the door a bit to unfinished prototypes. I think generally, if people want to talk about unfinished prototypes, that's completely fine. If they get past the developers, we've already technically had a few which have been passed, which were kind of like that. But the main thing when it comes to this is So from a community idea or from a general perspective, I think this is actually a good thing because it fosters more discussion around these interesting vehicles, and it means that more community members can learn more about the history of warfare and the history of general military stuff and some of the ideas that some of the manufacturers had about what they wanted to build. From my personal point of view, though, I disagree with the addition of unfinished prototypes. The reason for this is many. The first one is there is a reason, why their stats are, kind of a bit ambiguous, and also there have been historians in the past who have lied about certain vehicles. If you want to have a look at it, go and have a look at the E series of vehicles, the E5, which never existed and wasn't ever actually a thing at all, but somehow it got publicized as this real thing, especially post World War II. Then if you want to have a look at some other things, the biggest issue I have when it comes to using unfinished prototypes in the game and also past the developers is the main factor that without proper testing, without fully testing a vehicle when it's put together, the manufacturer can lie through their teeth when it comes to the specs of the vehicle. And if you don't believe me, there are plenty of examples from different nations where the manufacturer's expectations of the vehicle are nowhere near what the vehicle actually does. And by putting through unfinished prototypes, you lead it to the fact that therefore they're not tested, therefore you have to go off manufacturers' projections, and guess what? As I said, they lie through their teeth because they want contracts, they want to be able to build this vehicle. Just go and have a look at, even in America, or especially Britain or Germany or the Soviet Union at the time, you can find many projects where what will happen is a manufacturer will put forward a proposal. The proposal is completely just completely crazy with what it's able to project to do. And then when they actually build the thing and they actually test the thing, then they find out that the projections they made are nowhere near what they actually said. You find this a lot in engine designs. You find this a lot when it comes to tanks as well, and mainly planes, I've got to say, especially with the Soviet Union and when it comes to some of their vehicles. But if this is just for community discussion, that's completely fine. But I personally am not happy with the idea of unfinished prototypes making it into War Thunder because of that fact. Because we cannot make accurate, well, we just do not have accurate sources on these vehicles and what can happen with them. And every vehicle that has been added in War Thunder, which has been, let's call it an unfinished prototype or a paper vehicle, has had serious balance issues in the past. So yeah, and had to have like game-changing things happen in the game to actually force them to be not as good as they were before. The R2Y2, the whole reproduction, stuff such as even the J6K right now, if you've ever flown that thing, the Tiger 2 105 back in the day, the Panther 2. All of these vehicles had a ridiculous time in the sun and seem to be a big old annoyance to balance. The E100 right now has a repair cost which is, the last time I told somebody about it, it was like near 30k, but I don't know what it is now. So yeah, it seems like these vehicles are really rough to balance because, you know, you have to change these statistics yourself. Another thing I do want to point out when it comes to these ideas, right? So one of the problems with adding rules to an already pre-existing rulebook is you need to make sure that you follow that rulebook. Otherwise, it's very hard to take any of the rules seriously. Now, there are a bunch of rules here on, obviously, stay opinion free. There are plenty of posts which have opinions in them. You know, they talk about what they believe when it comes to the vehicle and where it should be. Then the main one that I want to talk about is this one. Because this is one I see a lot, especially when going through the series. One of the nice things about the Path to Developer series is I learn a lot of new information about vehicles and about ideas. I really enjoy the series because of the fact it's opened me up to a lot of vehicles that, especially modern vehicles, that I generally, you know, don't know a lot about. I'm much more of a World War II guy, and therefore, you know, learning about stuff in the Cold War or in the modern day, it's interesting to me. I find it, you know, it's nice to increase like the knowledge base. The problem is when I look through these posts and then I look through the sources of the post and realize that the majority, if not all of the posts, has just been straight copy pasted from a third-party website. And they have a rule against this, which is great, right? They have a rule against this. They also have a rule against paper fictional vehicles. But I just want to focus on this rule. So this rule right here, you know, copy-paste entire sections from third-party websites for use in your suggestion. This was passed in August 2020. So this was the most recent thing which was passed, right? It was, you know, passed for the, as I said, part of the aviation for August 2020 is the Berezniak Isayev BI-1. This is straight copy-pasted. This is straight copy-pasted. The only thing that isn't copy-pasted is this part here. I feel this aircraft would make an excellent addition to War Thunder, and that's an opinion. So you're supposed to stay opinion-free. And, oh, you see this history section? Yeah, this is fully copy-pasted as well. And you want to know where it's copy-pasted from? Wikipedia. So you can see here, early design, and then it talks about the early design. Wartime development, right? Test flights on the Urals. Oh look, early design. Wartime development. Test flight on the Urals. Oh, what's the last thing? A new engine? Oh, let's see. Is it true? Oh look, return to Moscow Isayev's engine, aka a new engine. They've straight copied and pasted this whole thing. And if you don't believe me, right? So, Soviet research and development of rocket-powered aircraft began Sergei Korolev's, right? Soviet research and development of rockets-powered aircraft began with Sergei Korolev's. Like, the thing is, they've even left the hyperlinks in it. Nobody would go to the effort of leaving the hyperlinks here. So, and also the general characteristics, oh look, it's completely copied from here. The problem with having a rule set is if you keep adding to it, but you don't enforce that rule set, then what's the point of the rule set? So it's nice that they've given clarification on something, but I'd also like to offer this. Please enforce your rules, so you don't end up with this, which is just a straight copy and pasted thing. And if you're not going to enforce your rules evenly, and you're going to decide that some things should be passed to developers even though they're just a straight copy and paste, or breaking some of the other rules, then you're going to get accused of bias constantly. And therefore there is no point in your rules, and people will lose faith. So before updating and changing rules, make sure that your rules are already enforced. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd just like to thank Trigger Hippie, Universe, Conte Baraka, Elove Eugens Terry, Ambrosius McClellan, Daniel Stanton, Martinez, B. Young, Hans, and Samuel Slick for supporting the channel.